Hello, I'm back, and I'm also late. I was gonna actually do this an hour and a half ago. You've been quiet the whole time, sweetie. Why are you talking now? I've been reading for an hour. Stop. Just come up. Come up or I'm gonna kick you out. Shh. Anyway, so I'm gonna read some stuff to counter what Wes was saying. Uh, Last time I went to go rub my eye and I accidentally peeled off this scab. So I had to cut the show short, and then the next day I was doing some silly stuff with with B.S. Lewis. It was kind of a reunion of people who used to be on Gar's channel, and then the last 30 minutes kind of went off the rails. So today we're going to start off with reading a little bit of the ecumenical councils. We're going to start off with the first ecumenical council, this is going to be from 325. We're going to read two sections. One's going to be the main from the main council. The other one is going to be a subsection, kind of what we call a synod. To understand the difference, synod is more like for a local church or local region, and isn't necessarily for all the church, but they're usually commenting on our giving context to the greater council, which would be the ecumenical council. Okay, this is all preserved in a work by Philip Schaff and Henry Weiss, and as well as Henry R. Percival. This is my preferred one to go to. You can also go to Dessinger, but I don't really like Dessinger. I like going with Philip Schaff, which makes me sound really pretentious because I know he's a pretentious name among uh, scholarly and ap- apostolic circles. It's making it hard for me to think. Stop singing. Okay. So we're going to start off with, hold on, because we're going to read two things here. I didn't write down the page. I think it was 55. When she starts singing, it really does distract me. Oh, no, wait. Why is it not writing? Are you kidding me? She stepped on my thing. Darn it. Okay. I hope it was page 55. Okay, yeah, it was. Okay, so we're going to start off with Canon 6. And I believe this is going to be from the Council of Nice. Here we go. So let the ancient customs in Egypt, Libya, of let the ancient customs in Egypt, Libya, and Pentapolis prevail, that the Bishop of Alexandria have jurisdiction in all of these, since the like is customary for the Bishop of Rome also. Likewise, in Antioch and other provinces, let the churches retain their privileges. And this is to be universally understood, that if anyone be made bishop without the consent of the metropolitan, the Great Synod has declared that such a man ought not to be a bishop. If, however, 2 or 3 bishops shall form natural love of contradiction, oppose the common suffrage of the rest, it being reasonable and in accordance with the ecclesial law, then let the choice of the majority prevail. The Bishop of Alexandria shall have jurisdiction over Egypt, Libya, and Pentapolis, as the Roman bishop over those subject to Rome. So too the Bishop of Antioch, and the rest over those who are under them. If any be a bishop contrary to the judgment of the metropolitan, let him be no bishop, provided it be in accordance with the canons and the suffrage of the majority. If three object, their objection shall be made of no force. Okay, so there you have it. From the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Nice. Canon 6. You have the recognition of Rome. But let's say that's not good enough for you. Okay. We are now going to go to Canon 39. Let me make sure I have the right one. Canon 39. Stop. Of the care and power which a patriarch has over the bishop and archbishops, and of his patriarchate, and of the primacy of the bishop of Rome over all. Let the patriarch consider what things are done by the archbishops and bishops in their provinces, and if he shall find anything done by them otherwise than it should be, let him change it and order it as seemeth him fit. For he is the father of all, and they are his sons. And although the archbishop be among the bishops as an elder brother, who hath the care of his brethren, and to whom they owe obedience, because he is over them, yet the patriarch is to all those who are under his power, just as he who holds the seat of Rome is the head and prince of all patriarchates, or patriarchs, inasmuch as he is first, as was Peter, to whom power is given over all Christian princes. That means bishops or cardinals. And over all peoples, as he who is the vicar of Christ our Lord over all peoples and over the whole Christian church, and whoever shall contradict this is excommunicated by the synod. So, if you are a Protestant who is affirming the first 7 ecumenical councils, mind you, this is the first one that I read was from the Council of Nice. This one is actually the Arabic canons of a synod that follows. Okay, but you have two. Honey, I'm really seriously busy. You have two different synods, two different ecumenical councils here. I'm getting the words wrong now. You have two different gatherings, one council and one synod. Early church here. We're talking about pre-500s. This is 324, 325-ish where we're at. And we have two saying the exact same thing. That the Patriarch of Rome is special, and he has special authority, and he has special authority that he can wield over the church. And that they, if you read the little details in the notes, want to have that same authority over their particular region. So just as the Pope, they don't call it the Pope here, but just as the Patriarch of Rome exercises special authority over the church, but also over his region, meaning the District of Rome, the Diocese of Rome, so too do they want to have special authority over the diocese under their region, under their patriarchate. That's what's being argued here. So for those who say it's not in the early church or there's no recognition of a pope, I just read it to you. It is right there. And if you have a Protestant friend who's an apologist, who's going to try to tell you that they ascribe or they agree or they submit, whatever word they want to use, to the first 7 ecumenical councils, that includes acknowledgments of Rome's, let's call it, being the first among equals. Rome has a special place, as does Alexandria, as does a few other ones. If you go back to they're talking about the Archbishop of Greece. They're talking about Persia. They're talking about Ethiopia. They're talking about the Synod of Greece. They're talking about the Archbishop of Cyprus. So there's things that build up to this declaration about Rome and how they want to have power over their region, just as Rome has power over the whole church, as well as power over its select region, over, you want to call it see, over its diocese, over Italy, over the West, however you want to word it. And what this is going to break down to is that Rome is supposed to be in charge of the West and then have a special tie-breaking vote with the rest of the patriarchs. And that kind of gets messed up once the Muslim invasion happens and a lot of these churches start falling to Islam. That is why a little bit later in history, the Greek church will reach out to the Roman church to help. Because they are both politically and militarily tied to each other, not just religiously. And this gets really complicated and it gets really ugly when a group of French mercenaries go rogue. The less we say about that and during this part of the conversation, the better. But there's another thing that I would like to do here on this, let's call it let's read. Let's look at a few of these canons here. Because, and I've read this on my channel before when I was doing a special on the 7 ecumenical councils. That one was not a very popular series, so I didn't continue it. But I was in a debate yesterday that the last 30 minutes kind of became a train wreck. Well, the guy was saying that there is no ordinances in the church to deal with things like abuse or miscarriages of justice. But there are. And it's in this same document that I was just reading to you. I'm going to go over only a few of them, but I want to just kind of give you a flavor. Canon 1, insane persons and energumenians should not be ordained. Bond servants are not to be ordained. Neophytes in the faith are not to be ordained. Cohabitation of women with bishops, presbyters, and deacons is prohibited on account of their celibacy. The decree that bishops shall not live with women, nor shall a presbyter who is a widower, nor shall they escort them, nor be familiar with them, nor gaze upon them. And the same decree is made with regard to celibate priests, and the same concerning deacons who have no wife. And this is the case whether the woman be beautiful or ugly, whether young or beyond the age of puberty, whether great in birth or an orphan, taken out of charity under pretext, or for the devil with such arms slays religious bishops, presbyters, and deacons, and incites them to fiery desires. But if she be an old woman and advanced of age, and be a sister, mother, aunt, grandmother, or relative of this type, it is permitted for them to live with them because such persons are free from all suspicion of scandal. It's here. It's in Canon 4 of the first synod that follows the first ecumenical council. These rules have been part of the church from the beginning. They are restated and they are given more power, and they are given actually power to the secular authorities in Trent. So when people say that these rules don't exist, they have existed in the church since the beginning. If the church isn't following its own rules, that's not a problem with the rules. That's a problem with the people in the church. That's not a problem of the religion. It's a problem of the people, about the individual person who is in whatever individual position of power. The election of a bishop and the confirmation of the election. Those excommunicated by one bishop are not to be received by another. The councils should be held twice a year of consideration of the patriarchs of Alexandria and Antioch and of their jurisdiction, of one who solicits the episcopate when the people do not wish him, and if the desire or if they do desire him, but without the consent of the archbishop. In other words, no one can be a bishop or a priest without the consent of a higher ranking bishop or priest. It must all be consensual, going all the way up to the top. The metropolitan of a church of Caesarea being preserved and intact. Of those who force themselves into the presbytery without election or examination, of the bishop who ordains one whom he understands has denied the faith, also of one who ordains who after that is held to deny it, crept into orders. Being a monk without a bishop's license, clerics or religious who lend in usury shall be cast off from their grade. They're also going to be excommunicated if they have usury of above 150%. I guess that's profit. It doesn't. It just says 150%. They're going to be excommunicated, kicked out of the church is what it actually says. Honor shall be paid to the bishop and to the presbyter by the deacons. It's really interesting when you actually read through this. There's a lot of, hey, the deacons aren't being respectful of the bishops. There's just a lot of they won't do what the bishops say. What's up with these deacons? It's really funny actually. Okay, anyway. The system and manner of receiving those who return after a lapse of faith and receiving the relapsed, and of those brought into peril of death by sickness before their penance is finished concerning such as are convalescent. Of avoiding the conversation of evil workers and wizards, also of the penance of them who have not avoided such. The incestuous marriages, contrary to the law of the spiritual relationship, and the penance of such marriages. And it's the penance shall last 20 years, and only the godfather or the godmother are mentioned, and nothing is said of separation. Men shall not hold females at the front, neither women males, nor females, no women females, and men males. Yeah, you're not allowed to see each other naked. On the prohibition of marriages of spiritual brothers and sisters, of him who has married two wives at the same time, and though lust has added another woman to his wife, and of his punishment. This goes on and on. Let me see. There's a few other ones. Let me see. Rules about monks. Rules about how to handle complaints. Complaints going to the archbishop. Bishops shall not be allowed the separation of a wife from her husband on the account of discord. Marriages with infidels are to be avoided. How to do oversight of a monastery or church. And all of it has to do with clergy and how the priest and the deacons and the bishops are to relate to each other and deal with each other, and where you have authority and how you can't intermix church. You can't just go to another church. And if you mess up in one church, you're not allowed to just go to another church. You actually have to stay out of the church. All that's here in the canons, man. It's all here. You're not supposed to give your kid to an infidel without their knowledge. That means in marriage. The bishop convicted of adultery or another crime shall be deposed without hope of restoration, and shall not be excommunicated, but he cannot be undeposed. Let's see. It's just talking more and more about this. But it has a lot of rules about how to handle people and how not to interact with certain people, and how interaction of a sexual nature or adulterous nature will lead to excommunication, 20 years penance, 50 years penance, so on and so forth. And that even if some of them are going to lead to defrocking, some are going to lead to excommunication. Some of these punishments are going to lead to... Okay. Yeah, excommunication, and kicked out of the church, deposed, deposed. I guess just deposed. I don't see another way to word it. Should be cast out forcefully without any blame. So yeah, so I mean, again, we're talking about the 300s and 400s here, and the church already has these laws. So, all right, that's what I wanted to say the other day when I scratched off my scab and I had to finish the show early. But that's all in here. You can read it here. You can read it in English. I recommend you buy this book. It's $56. I know. We're all broke. You can probably get it maybe a little cheaper on eBay, but go to Amazon and buy this today and learn what the church really teaches. And by the church, I don't just mean the Catholic Church. I mean the entire church when it was whole, when it was one whole church before the fracturing and shattering of the schisms. Learn what the church actually thinks about itself and says how things work. This is a very good book to read, and it's really easy to read. And if you only want to read the canons, you can do that. You don't have to read all the extra commentary. All right, now let's do just a little tinge, just a little bit, not too much, of commentary on our friend L. Wesley. From Wes, we are going to move on tomorrow. Stop. You're actually talking over me. I know. So tomorrow we're not going to do base camp. If we do base camp, it'll be next Saturday. Tomorrow we're going to actually do a week of Big John Steele, and we're going to be debunking a lot of the stuff that he says. So we're going to try to do as much Wes as we can right now to get through as much of his stuff as possible, because we're not going to do any Wes next week. The Big John stuff's going to take the whole week. Okay, let's do this. Unless, of course, Big John's asked me not to look at his videos, which would be kind of cowardly, but who knows what kind of person he is. So we shall find out. Does anyone know what NL says? It says premium NL now. I don't know what NL means. I don't know what any of this means. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Wes Huff interview. I got to put the link back to that guy's channel, by the way. What's this guy's name? Julian Dory. All right, here we go.
That's sort of in our consciousness. When we think of the Bible, we think of it, you have the King James with the leather cover on the, and, maybe thumb indexing on the pages, right?
Right.
But it didn't fall out of the sky like that. A lot of them were independent written documents like this. Now, Constantine commissions, to great expense of the Roman Empire, a number of what we would then consider as more of a Bible, Genesis to Revelation. So if you look up...
Did he commission that at Nicaea?
No, previous to this.
Previous.
Yeah. Almost as like a peace offering, to like, hey, Christians, I'm on your side.
I want to be very clear. All of this is slight speculation because, again, Constantine doesn't actually convert until his deathbed, and there's a lot of different theories around that. So to hear Wes speculate like this wildly and act like it's known history or accepted history is misleading. Especially when he's talking to someone who's playing this stupid. I'm not saying that the guy's stupid. I'm saying he's playing stupid. He's playing dumb. He's playing as if he doesn't know. For all we know, Julian, if that's his name, knows all of this stuff. But he's playing dumb because he wants his audience to learn this stuff with him, which is fine. But Wes shouldn't be acting as if what he's saying is established fact. It's not. It's speculative. We don't know why Constantine did the things that he did. There is an explanation in Orthodox tradition, because in Orthodoxy, him and his mother are saints.
But if you look up codexsinaiticus.org.
Codex?
C-O-D.
How do you spell Sinaiticus?
So it's codex with an X. I think you got it. Yeah, codexsinaiticus.org. The British Library, once again, oh, something went wrong.
All right, hold on. Let me Google it. Codex Sinaiticus. See that.
Yep, that's it.
All right, cool.
So you can click see the manuscript at the top. So this is put on by the British Library. And
Okay.
then, so Genesis is not a very good example. So the thing with codexes is that the front and the ends are very vulnerable.
Yeah, what are we looking at right here?
Yeah, we're looking at Genesis chapter 21. So this is all that survives of that
That's
section.
all that's left?
Yeah.
So did people like fill in the blanks with what they thought it said?
I mean, we have tons of these manuscripts. So the answer is both yes and no. So we have both Codex Sinaiticus, and then we have all.
So again, I don't want to say he's being misleading here, but he's leaving a lot out. So I'm just going to show you something kind of interesting. Because the way that we get all this stuff is we kind of compile everything and then we make value judgments of what we've compiled. The older something is, the more accurate we consider it. It's not about having tons and tons of passages that say the same thing. If there's 4 or 5 documents from around the same time period, but they say slightly different things, then you go with the majority. So what the majority of the texts say in the same time period, that's going to be the one we consider more authoritative. But if there's an older text, that was more authoritative by the sheer sake of it being older. Now, there's other criteria. I don't know all the criteria, so I'm not going to try to pretend to give you all the criteria, but I want to just give you a list here. So here are all the papyri. Okay. Some of these fragments are super small, some of them are not, some of them are larger. And you have where they're at and what they're doing. And they're compiling all of this into this version of the New Testament. Okay? Not all of these papyri and not all of these codexes have everything in the Bible. Sometimes it's just a single book. Sometimes it's just maybe a single gospel, some epistles, and the Psalms. And that's all you get. And as a Christian, you're happy with that because that right there is a small fortune of documents already. You have a small library of Christian texts. And then whatever the church that you go to attends, whatever the parish that you're going to, I should say, has, whatever the bishop has and what he's teaching from, that's where you're getting all this information. And you're going to church either weekly or daily. And if you're going to daily mass, you're getting a lot of documents. You're getting this orally. And yes, you're getting it in the language that you live in. So if you're in a Latin-speaking country, you're going to be getting it in Latin. If you're in a Greek-speaking country, you're going to be getting it in Greek. And in the documents we were just reading from, it tells you which readings are acceptable. These are these canon lists that Wes is talking about, but it's really saying what's acceptable to use in different churches. You also, if you read the church fathers, you will see the church fathers also give lists of what's acceptable to read for mass and what stuff is not acceptable for mass, for the liturgy, but is acceptable for private use and private practice. This is called the second canon or Deuterocanon. So it's good for edification, it's good for learning, it is inspired, but it's not good to be read to the masses because it can be easily misunderstood or misinterpreted, and we don't want to mislead them. And then there's other stuff that's historical but not inspired, and then lower and lower, and that's how that happens. Here, you're just getting a list of all the different manuscripts that are being compiled into this. Nowadays, they use computers, but this used to at one point have to be done. And also, not just Greek manuscripts, but also Latin manuscripts. I think there's also maybe some Aramaic that's included here. And so you have this material. So let's go a little bit of this. You have P, you have S, you have C, you have, hold on, I'm reading the wrong thing. I flipped too far back. They're revising their standard Bible, blah, 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 selected bibliography. I think I skipped it. Okay, well, I was going to tell you which ones they pick and how they explain Sinaiticus and everything else, but I missed the page, and I don't know where I did it, and I don't want to spend like an hour reading through this. But just know that there are different variants and different collections, and we put them all together. And it's really important to understand how that works. So we have traditional material, non-traditional material, liturgy, prayer books. We add all of these together. So it's not just scraps of the Bible, but church father commentaries. The church father commentaries usually will have the passage that they're talking about written on top, and then they'll explain the passage for the next 2 or 3 pages. If it's that much in print, I don't know how much material it is when it's in the written manuscript, but it's a lot of explanation. So you have this little passage and you have a lot of explanation underneath. And they'll write whole texts, whole scripts on one sentence. And they'll just go through and explain it. And this was part of their daily readings, their daily homilies. You might think of them as sermons, but these aren't sermons. And there were different times scheduled for different things. So maybe you might have a lecture before the Mass, and then you'd have a homily during the Mass, and then you'd have an after thing, if you will, a type of extra sermon after the Mass. And so when someone went to church in these ancient times, it wasn't just 1 hour at church. This was a whole thing. This was a whole event. You're going to be there for a day. You're going there. You're going to be entertained, and you're going to get a show. So you're going to get a preamble. You're going to get the Mass, which is the main thing. And the Mass isn't going to be an hour. It's going to be like 2 hours, 2 hours and a half. And then you're going to get an after thing. So you're going to be there for a good 5 hours, 6 hours. So you're there. You're completely committed. There are no seats or places to sit. You're going to be standing. In some houses, maybe you might be reclining, especially if you're an older person. But for the most part, you're going to be standing during these ceremonies. And the priest, the preacher, the presbyter, isn't looking at you. He's looking at the bread. He's speaking to God, and he's talking to God just the way the rabbis would, just the way the Levitical priest would, because he's speaking to God. Okay? So you got to understand all of this context. And Wes is just leaving all of this out and letting this poor guy and letting the audience of this poor guy put everything in a modern American Protestant evangelical context. And that's not the context of the ancient world. The ancient world had hierarchies, and hierarchies were super important. There are discussions what to do with the female presidents. That's what they call them. They don't call them deacons. They call them the female presidents. What do we do with them? Like, they're in our church and we've given them authority. What kind of authority? Well, not ecclesial authority. So that even though they're presidents, they're not presidents of the church. Yes, they are deaconesses. Yes, they are apostles of a type, but they're not officially part of the church. And this is come down till today, where nuns who are super important, who are sisters of the church, are not actually paid by the church. They have to apply for a job to be the secretary or to be the usher, and then they get paid as the usher. They're not getting paid as a nurse or as a nun. While a priest is getting paid just to be a priest, then he'll get paid for whatever else he's doing. A nun is not getting paid by the church. And it's because of these documents here that we just touched upon.
Also, a number of other ones. But this is probably, I mean, you can also, so click at the top, Genesis.
Where does it say that?
So right up, choose a passage, it says, just above there.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
So go up, click Genesis, go down all the way, and go to Matthew.
Okay.
It's going to look a lot nicer than...
Oh, yeah, that's clean.
Yeah, so, and then you can even look, so that what they've done is you can actually go to chapter and verse. And then they have it on the side, right? So they have the transcription in the, what is a modern Greek script, and then the translation on the bottom.
Right.
They've done a pretty good job. And you can zoom into this, and you can look at the different aspects. This is another document that I work pretty often with. Interestingly enough, when Billy Carson refers to the Sinai Bible, he's talking about this.
When he said, is that the whole thing where he talks about like Jesus going to the pyramids and shit?
No, he says that the crucifixion is not in the Sinai Bible. And he credits this as one of, if not the earliest Bibles.
And you're saying this is the same thing.
I'm saying this is not just the same thing, but this reads exactly like your copy of the Gospel of Matthew today.
And it says,
No. I would love for what Wes just said to be true. There are many, many, many fragments and whole copies that go into the 5th edition. This is just for the English, by the way. There's this is the 28th. 28th? Yeah, 28th edition. I'm sure there's going to be a new one soon if there isn't one already. These are looking at 2 different traditions with many, 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 many variations. And even though they're looking at sometimes similar or the same, they come to different conclusions on what the same text means or says. And they come to different conclusions on which fragments are more authoritative than another fragment. Sometimes the differences are super minor, sometimes they're huge. When you get into translation choice, then it gets even weirder because you have to understand that the Bible itself, you're already jumping languages. So the New Testament is in Koine Greek, but not all the documents or fragments are in Koine Greek. Some of them are in Aramaic, some of them are in Latin. Most of it's going to be in Latin in the ancient world, especially in these what we would call lectionaries or what we would call missals, or these like Bible reading selections. In the breviaries or in the liturgies, which is what I read to you all. If you guys watch my Secret Sermon series, that's just me reading the lectionary. I'm just reading the lectionary and the Liturgy of the Hours, or what's called the office readings. That's all I'm reading to you all. Those passages preserve the Bible. So there's multiple ways to retrieve the Bible should the Bible be lost. We have multiple traditions, multiple strings of tradition to look at. And they're all a little different. And when you're translating from Koine Greek to modern Greek, or Koine Greek to Latin, or Koine Greek to Latin to New Latin, or Latin to German, or Latin to whatever else, or you're translating from Biblical Hebrew to modern Hebrew, or from Biblical Hebrew to Greek back into modern Hebrew, you have translators making choices. And those choices can drastically change the content, the context. Echo, turn on library. I really need to get it to stop doing that. It does it every night. Okay, so
I'm not quite sure how to help.
Echo, stop. So you have to understand that all of this means that when we get to a Bible, it's not reading exactly the same. And if you want to see this, look at the CSB and look at the ESV. They read completely different. I'm picking 2 Protestant translations, 2 Protestant traditions. Or you guys can't accuse me of being, biased in my Catholicism. But if you're a Catholic, you can do this the same. Look at the NAB and look at the RSV. They don't even come close. Look at the New Jerusalem and look at the Douay-Rheims. They're not similar. They're not even similar in verbiage. So what Wes is saying is completely 100% false. Not only are there multiple traditions that disagree with each other, but even in translation, they don't match. Not that the original wording isn't the same translation source, although many times it's not. but simply by having different translators make different decisions on what word fits best. You also have linguistic drift, or what's more commonly called, when talking about the King James and the New King James, the problem of false friends, which is a word that used to mean one thing at one period of time. That same word now means something completely different in another period of time. And you, being a reader from a later time period, are giving the wrong definition to the word because you're thinking it's the later definition when it's actually the earlier definition. There's also false friends in how words sound. There are some words that fall out of usage and then the sound of that word comes back, but it's not the same word and it doesn't have the same context. This happens more with English than in other languages because we borrow a lot of words from different languages, and sometimes two words sound exactly alike, but they're not. But this happens. We're not talking about scribal error here. We're not talking about what's it called, interlooping or interlocking, whatever. We're not talking about any of that. This is just pure translation. So translation to translation, you have differences. That does not mean you can't understand the Bible or that you need to have a ton of certificates or degrees to understand the Bible, but you have to be literate. And if you're not literate and you don't understand how words work, if you have a friend who watches a movie, okay, and they turn to you, and say, "I thought she was dead," and you go, "What are you talking about?" That character, I thought she died. And he said, in this movie? And they go, "Oh, no, in this other movie, I thought this character died." And you're like, it's the same actress, but it's a different movie. It's not a documentary. It's just a different movie. And they look at you like they're lost. They're like, "Yeah, but she was dead." And you're like, that was a different character, same actress, different character, different movie. Oh. So if you have people today who don't understand that the film has a language of its own, if they don't understand entertainment media language, if there's people who are media illiterate or news illiterate or YouTube illiterate, where they don't understand that some of this is acting, some of these are networks, like this guy could be plain dumb, but he actually knows all these facts. Like maybe when they were talking earlier, they already talked about all of this, and now he's kind of play acting through the questions to get Wes to be more interesting and more entertaining for the audience, or that some of these people seem to come out of nowhere, now suddenly they're famous. Where other people have been on YouTube for years and they're not famous. You're like, how did that happen? And it's because there's sponsorships and because there's networks and there's levels of trust between YouTube and certain creator organizations, and there's editors and teams and things to promote. And you're like, well, what does that have to do with what I'm watching? Like, I'm just watching. And you're like, oh no, the algorithm and all this stuff's doing things. If you're illiterate or unaware or ignorant of those things, then me having a conversation about my editorial process will make no sense to you. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you making those choices? That seems dishonest. Why would you even choose to do that? Well, that's what you have to do to have a good product. If you want it to be legible, to be understandable to your audience. So we're not just talking about what the writers, the authors of the Bibles choose. You're talking about what the transcribers and the scribes who preserved the Bible had to choose. This is very complicated stuff, and it is the job of linguists like Kip and Dan and Bart and Wes to work out what the true meaning, what the original intent was of these writings. And sometimes they get it wrong, and sometimes they get it right. And what the Catholic Church is saying, that's great. We love what you're doing, and we appreciate it. But we're going to stick with our tradition. So what the church said it was doing when it first put it together, we're going to go with that interpretation. And if you give us any information that means that we have to change things, we'll change things subsequently. But we're not going to give up our tradition. We have our tradition to tell us what it says because we put it together in the first place, and the whole point is to keep it on the guide rails. If you're a Protestant who's gone through the Reformation and you think Reformation theology is going to save you, but then you find out there's all these different reformers who have different opinions, and you're like, well, that's not that different than the Church Fathers. The Church Fathers had different opinions, but the Church Fathers had to submit to a single authority, being the church, the universal church. We can talk about Antioch and Rome and Alexandria and Constantinople and Corinth. We can have that argument another day. The point is, they felt that they had to answer to an authority. What happened in the Reformation is that there was no authority. The Bible itself is its authority. So you have one scribal tradition, the Masoretic text, and they're all submitting to that. Except that's a later interpretation of the Hebrew. It's not the original stuff. There is older stuff, older Hebrew that has contradictions to the newer Masoretic stuff. But if you're only coming from the King James tradition, well, you think, well, that's a direct line. That's going straight back to Sinaiticus, right? That's going straight back to the Septuagint, right? No. In fact, you interrupted the line by reintroducing the Masoretic text. And on top of that, you're not even an original translation. You're actually a paraphrase of, I believe, the Wesleyan Bible. And you're also a paraphrase of a Catholic Bible called the Douay-Rheims. And you're using some of their stuff, even though you're saying you're breaking away from them, you're using some of their interpretation. And you're just strictly copying, pasting these parts that you can't translate, you can't make sense of. You're using the Catholic version that you say you're running away from. So this is truly problematic for someone like Wes, who is trying to present a more coherent argument to someone like Julian. And it gives a false impression of uniformity and consensus where there wasn't one. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a final say. There was an authority this whole time to say what was right or wrong. It was called the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church, when I say that, I need you, the audience, not to think of the current Roman bishop. The Bishop of Rome is in charge of the Diocese of Rome. And he's also the Patriarch of the West. When I am talking about the Pope, I am talking about his role as Patriarch, not his role as Bishop of Rome. Those are two very different jobs, and they have two very different things. When the Pope, as the Bishop of Rome, says a statement, that statement is authoritative for his diocese. When the Pope, as the Patriarch, says something for something as the Patriarch, that's informative for all of Western Latin Christianity. When he speaks as the universal head of the church, as the vicar of Christ, that's something that's dogmatic for the whole entire church. That's only happened like 7 or 9 times in all of history. It is very rare. And it's usually only when there's some kind of controversy that has to be answered or something that is non-biblical that needs to be brought forth. So a non-biblical issue, there's 2 or 3 or 4 warring factions. It looks like there might be a church split. We got to make a decision. Here's the decision. This is the new dogma going forward. This argument is settled. The Pope is wearing many hats. And there are multiple popes. There's a Pope of Antioch. There's a Pope of Alexandria. They're also called Pope because it's just Latin for Papa. It just means the father. But the Father of Fathers, the head of the church, the voice of the church is the Pope of Rome, the Patriarch of Rome, the Papa of Rome. But he still has to submit to the head of Christ. And whatever he says has to coincide with whatever's in the Bible. There are 3 active traditions: holy tradition, written tradition, and I forget what the third one is right now, liturgy. So when you put all 3 of these together, none of them can overwrite the other one. So if the Pope says something that is contradictory to the other 2, the bishops or the body Catholic can tell the Pope he's wrong and he has to recant. And when the Pope, I'm not sure if it was with the German bishops or if it was with granting gay blessings or if it was Pachamama, it was one of these three big ones. A certain group of schismatic bishops in the American Catholic Church and Canadian Catholic Church tried to get together and write a letter to say, hey, we have enough disagreement in the church to pressure you into admitting you're wrong, just like St. Paul II did when he kissed the Quran. You now have to take it back because we have consensus. Except they don't have consensus. They're a very small sect. It is not the body Catholic rejecting a papal statement. It is a group of bishops rejecting the Eastern Patriarch's comments, not even a declaration. So it's really complicated how this works. But they don't have a consensus to reject a statement, and his statement wasn't a universal statement, so he wasn't speaking as the Pope, even though he is the Pope. Because he has many different hats.
Is the opposite of what he's saying.
It says what any other Bible translation you're going to work with. So
And you can find that through this Codex Sinaiticus.
Yeah, you could just go to chapter and verse and read through it. Nonetheless, we're pretty sure this is one of the Bibles that Constantine commissioned, based on the dating of it.
Why are we only... Oh, so we're just doing it based on the date. That's why we don't know for sure that he said we're doing this.
Well, no, we have his decree that he did this. And
But
then
not for this one necessarily.
No, he doesn't like. So this one, we kind of conclude based on its dating and based on just how expansive it is. So this book would have taken 360 sheep to make. It would have been exorbitantly expensive. So based on the fact that we know that A, Constantine commissioned these Bibles to be produced, and B, that he did so at great expense, this is what it would have looked like. So this is one of the clearest examples because we can actually like walk through the text. But there are other ones. In fact, there's one that's here in the States, Codex Washingtonianus, which is in it's in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. We have Codex Alexandrinus, which is another one that comes from this time, and Codex Vaticanus, which is in the Vatican Library. And so all of these documents...
Did you hear the little bit of resentment in his voice?
The Vatican? No, I haven't. Okay. But interestingly enough, it was like
You should go, Wes. I'll go with you. Look, I'm about to be jobless, and I'm going to be looking for a new career. I want to have time off. I plan on traveling. How about you and I don't have a lot of money to play with, but I have enough. How about you and we go to Rome together? Catholic and a Protestant. You can teach me linguistic stuff that I don't know, and I can show you Catholic things. Chicken? Come on. You know you want to. Maybe we'll meet the Pope together.
couldn't see Codex Vaticanus. It was like they're very like choosy with who could and couldn't go see it. And then 5 years ago, they digitized the whole thing, and they allowed people in. So I actually know people personally who have had access to the Vatican Library to look at Codex Vaticanus in person. But you have these examples.
And they say what's online matches up.
Oh yeah.
That's good.
Pictures. Yeah.
Shout out to the Vatican on that one.
I know, right?
I hate the implied mistrust of the Vatican there. That's so stupid and immature.
So we have these examples of what are probably, like, we can't say with 100% certainty, but based on the fact that these are pretty, A, they're professionally done, and B, this would have been like way beyond the scope of any, even a rich person at this time, to annihilate an entire flock of sheep simply to make a Bible. Like, it makes sense that based on the dating of these, that it was probably part of this commissioning by Constantine. So this...
I'm envisioning something now. I'm getting like a vision. Me and Wes together on a trip to the Vatican. Along the way, we visit Dan, Kip, and Derek. Oh, there's someone else in that group. Joshua. And I present my Catholic BS. He presents his Protestant BS. And the scholars try to correct us. And he'll be more lenient to the scholars because he's trying to be a scholar, right? I'm just a jackass, so it doesn't even matter. But I'll learn something, I'm sure. And then we get to the Vatican. We go into the Sistine Chapel. We visit all the stuff. We do all the things. We get a priest to make the Catholic argument. And then me and Wes can end it on a little friendly debate. I think this is an amazing show. Let's make it happen. I don't have the money for any of that, just FYI.
This is all in the intermediary period leading up to. So in terms of your question of why would they trust Constantine, I think Constantine had actually done a pretty good job of proving both with his act.
Because of his mother. Because she's a Catholic saint and an Orthodox saint and an important saint altogether. They didn't trust him absolutely. The bishops, the church fathers who were writing to him and against him and with him, they had their own opinions. I haven't read all of them, so I don't want to assume that what I've read in selections is representative of what they actually said, because sometimes the selections are cherry-picked and mislead. But let's just assume that the stuff that I've read from Jimmy Akin and the stuff that I've read from a few other apologists are correct, these selections. So you have the church fathers feel this friction here. Constantine is important because of what he represents and because of what he does. He's not important because he had power over the church. That is a incorrect assumption that comes from stuff like Gibbon and comes from stuff like the Protestant Reformation and from suspicion about the church and its supposed corruption or falling away or whatever, or apostasy. The church always had a, let's call it, tense relationship with political and military power. And that comes to a head during the time of the Borgias, where once Rome as the church has that power, it doesn't go well. But you're conflating history that will come almost 500 years after the point in history we're talking about right now. So actually more like 700 years later. So like you're in 300 and you're talking about history that's happening in 1200, 1300, 1400, 1500, 1600. You're talking about stuff that's happening during the Reformation, during the 15s. And you're acting as if that's reflective of the reality of the church and the Bible in the 300s. It's a completely different reality, the different political reality, different military reality, different scientific reality. Like the level of knowledge and the level of education, the level of everything is just so different.
Actions and with his words, although not perfectly, that he was a genuine believer and that when he calls...
Again, that's assuming a lot. And it's basing a lot on his conversion at his death, which was customary at the time, but that's still... Okay. Short version. We read through about 20 canons from one council, one ecumenical council, and one synod. We're now comparing what they said to what Wes is saying about them, because we're talking about the Council of Nicaea and I forgot what the second one. I think it was it Alexandria? Was it Africa? I don't remember. There was a synod that followed it. Hold on. Anyway, I don't. It'll take too long for me to look it up. The Synod of no, that's going to be Nicaea. The Synod of what? Anyway, there was a following synod that followed up with it, and then from there, we went into the breakdown of the New Testaments from the scraps and pieces, the fragments, and how we choose different variations in different translation traditions. So we were looking here at the two that are most common for the English translations, which is going to be the Nestle Allen and the UBS 5, and the Nestle Allen 28th. And then we were very basically going into how Wes seems to be conflating later history that would be relevant more to the 1500s with the events of 300 to 400 AD. That's where we're at.
The bishops to get along at the Council of Nicaea. And it's also important to keep in mind that he's not actually part of the proceedings. He says, hey.
Okay, that's fine, and that's exactly what you should say. But all through this part here, all of what the video we did 2 days ago, you implied that he was. So while I agree with you here, here's what I've noticed throughout this entire interview. He'll say something true, but unverifiable. And then he'll make a large sweeping statement with a lot of apologetics that is complete BS, complete bullshit. Julian will then ask a clarifying question, and he'll follow it up at the very end of each segment, all these little pauses, at the very end of each segment with the actual scholarly fact. But his apologetics and his bias toward Protestantism will take the majority of what he says, and he'll just spend maybe a minute or two clarifying what he said with actual facts. So it's unverifiable statement, question, apologetical propaganda, counter question or pushback question, clarification. And then the clarification will actually have the actual facts. And then you move on to the next question and the cycle starts over again. This has been happening for the last hour and 50 minutes with Wes. So that is bothersome. I do like that he's including the real facts. I don't like that he's letting his apologetics and his bias toward Protestantism interfere with his reporting of the facts.
I want you to get along. And then he backs off. And one of the reasons we're pretty confident that that is the case is because emperors like to take credit for all sorts of things.
You don't say.
And if yeah, I know, right? No politician does that today. Wait, are you telling me the politicians like to take credit for things?
Listen, I didn't say anything.
I don't know if I can believe that in this day and age. And he doesn't. We have no record of him taking credit for anything. In fact, we have record of him specifically backing off and letting the proceedings of the council take place. And then the Council of Nicaea was specifically to address this issue of Arianism, where Arian and his followers were saying the specific line is there.
So I don't agree with what he just said. And I read to you part of Nicaea right now. There is very little about Arianism in there. I don't like his framing of that. like I said, we might do a let's read later on where we're just doing where we're just going to read through one of the councils or two of the councils.
There was a time when the sun was not. Now, there's a story that's very fun, but it doesn't actually come from this time. It comes from later.
Okay.
That Saint Nicholas,
Like
the
Santa Claus?
Saint Nicholas, yeah, because he's from Myra in Turkey. He is a
Santa's Turkish.
he's a 4th century bishop.
No shit.
So the story is, although keep in mind, this is a little bit apocryphal coming afterwards. When Arius says there was a time when the sun was not, Saint Nicholas stands up and punches him in the face.
That's bad Santa.
Isn't that a fun story?
Yeah.
It's probably not true.
I want that to be true.
But you can find Eastern Orthodox icons of Saint Nicholas hitting
love
Arius.
that.
Yeah.
All right. Little
Yeah.
humanity there. You know, you gotta get the energy out sometimes.
Yeah, so that was the major issue. The major issue was, hey, we got to sort out this thing because we have a pretty articulate theology on how.
So the Catholic Church, meaning the Universal Church, already had a kind of structured authority, but they needed to work out how this structured worked. And you can see that being worked out in the Council of Nicaea. So it wasn't simply about Arius. It was also about working out how the political structure of the church worked. Because of because of Wes's Protestant bias, he's only concentrating on one aspect, an important aspect, but one aspect of what was addressed at the Council of Nicaea. Like I said, I was reading they were talking about how to deal with corruption, how to keep priests celibate, how to handle married priests. Like they're talking about all of this kind of stuff. Wes is only concentrating on the element that supports his thesis and not on the stuff that would disprove his vision of how the church is supposed to look and the hierarchy that is established in the earliest documents of the church. Again, don't think of it as the Catholic Church as in the church in Rome. This is the church universal. This is all the patriarchates that are around at that time coming together and saying, okay, Rome has supremacy, Antioch has supremacy, Jerusalem has supremacy, Alexandria has supremacy, and then in the next synod, hey, don't forget about Corinth. Don't forget about, okay, like, yes, Corinth has supremacy, whatever other place has supremacy. But the supremacy is limited, and the honor, the first among equals, shall go to Peter, shall go to the seat in Rome and Antioch. Well, what about us? Well, that's here. Okay, so you have this stuff going on that West seems wholly unable to address or unwilling to address.
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit operate within the one.
That's going to be the Nicene Creed, which is the big thing that comes out of the Council of Nicaea.
Of God. And what you're saying does not adhere to what actually Scripture articulates on that. The secondary issue, and you're exactly right in terms of saying that there were some dating issues in regards to holidays. The secondary issue was the date of Easter. When do we celebrate Easter based on?
That's not the secondary issue, but that is one of the issues that is addressed.
On what we see from some of the descriptions of when it could have been within the Gospels.
Yeah, they need a set date on that. Every year that pisses me off. It's like, is it going to be April? Is it going to be March? Is it that week? Is it? You know what I mean?
Well, it's based on the Jewish calendar, is why.
Yeah, set date.
Yeah, fair enough. But that was the main issue. So the Council of Nicaea had nothing to do with.
And that isn't where the issue lied. The issue lied that the Greek tradition under the John Christensen liturgy is celebrating it on one day with their patriarch endorsing that date. And the Latin rite, I don't know who does the Latin rite. I forget what they call it in the thing. I just saw it on the page and it's already gone from my head. But that would celebrate this holiday on a different day. And the Pope just kind of, for whatever reason, decided to anathemize everyone who didn't have it on that day. Just like I told you before, the Pope is not always right. So the bishops got together and told him, hey, you can't do this. You're going to anathematize half of Christendom. So he's like, okay, I take it back. You're not anathematized. But that was the beginning of what would later become the schism 1,000 years later. So just to understand, there was fallout, but it wasn't immediate. But it was a mistake for the Pope to have done that. And even though he corrected himself, it would lead to the Great Schism eventually.
Any books of scripture, and it had nothing
The other
to do
problem
with
is going to
establishing
the other problem is going to be the filioque.
any actual doctrine that wasn't already believed, but it addressed a theologically problematic belief that was becoming popular that was not in line with what scripture actually articulated.
So the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed is addressing more than just one heresy. It's addressing multiple heresies, which Wes is fair in saying many of them had already been dealt with before. This was just kind of clarifying it, wiping the table clean. But the Arian heresy was huge. So getting rid of the Arian heresy took a lot. I believe even one of the popes was an Arian. So it took a lot to address that. And when you get to the Council of Constantinople, that's where it really gets hammered out. So to think that it gets all addressed here in Nicaea is not true. That's why it's called the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed. It's not just one. They add the caveats in the Constantinopolitan.
But they quote scripture within the documents that come out of Nicaea, which includes the Nicene Creed, which sort of the bare minimum of what every Christian
Well, there's also the Apostles' Creed. There's more stuff to this.
denomination.
What's that? Like the I believe in one God, the Father Almighty.
No, that's the
creator of-
Apostles'
See, like I said, I think Julian's playing an act. He's playing a character. I think he knows more than he actually is leading on because he's referencing all the correct stuff.
Creed.
Oh,
Although I'm
right.
impressed that you know that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was right. It's
Yeah.
somewhere floating around in there.
Yeah. No, the Nicene Creed is a little bit more wordy than that.
Okay.
But they come up with that, and then they come up with 40 kind of
I'm guessing he might be a former Catholic or an Anglican, possibly a Lutheran.
statements that come out of that in a letter. So we actually have the actual documentation. It's not
The non-Trinitarian Arian heresy. Correct, Thomas. What are you doing up? It's late. We're both old men. I hope I'm not keeping you awake, my friend.
hard to figure out what Nicaea was actually about. We have the receipts from what actually took place. So that's why when you have something like Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, and he's saying that all
And I'm so sorry about jumping out of the stream 2 days ago. I'm not going to do it, but I did this and I accidentally peeled off the tissue for the scar that I have. So I guess the scar tissue would be the right wording there. So I had to jump off the stream for that. So I'm kind of making up for that today, since tomorrow we're going to start the challenge, the drum beating to take on John Steele.
sorts of things took place.
What a name.
Every scholar on planet Earth who had ever even done a cursory glance at Nicaea was like, hold on, like this is pretty easily demonstrated to be not just not the case, but like way off on a different universe.
Yeah, again though, but that's like I said this earlier. But I didn't realize like people were taking all that seriously. Maybe I'm like really naive on that. But,
They
like,
do.
It's also he wrote a fictional story based on some truth, but like of
Yeah.
course it's not all exact. Like if you're getting the Council of Nicaea history from Dan Brown, that's not Dan Brown's fault. That's your fault.
You would be surprised. We shouldn't be.
Yeah, I want to get Dan Brown in here badly, like at some point. So I'd love to ask him about that.
I mean, Dan Brown in the preface to the book says that the narrative is not true, but that the details are true. So,
All of them?
well, he claims that a lot of the things are actually representative of what took place in terms of this idea of Jesus being married, drawing from
The Golden Legend. Let's see if he says it correctly.
the Gospel of Philip and other things.
I think that now
Chicken shit. Hey, hold on. I'm going to grab a soda. I've been doing this for an hour and my throat's a little dry. I'll be right back. Don't worry. It's going to be sugar free. So let me ask you guys. I don't know how many people are in the room. My thing is showing 0, but my chat is showing at least 3 people. I don't know how many people are actually watching. I think the show the other day said 0, and when I clicked off it, then the number suddenly switched to 153 people. So I don't know how many people are watching. I really don't know what's going on with the analytics. Could you stop? So here's what I want to know. I have a consultation later this week to begin looking for a plastic surgeon. It's going to be minor plastic surgery, probably in and out in the same day. I don't know any details yet, but I'm going to show you guys. Hopefully, this doesn't affect the stream at all. I'm going to show you guys what this little girl did to me. And I want to get your opinion on if it looks okay, if it's going to affect my dating life, or if I should get plastic surgery. Okay? Hold on. Where is it? It's right here. Okay. So see what you guys think. Should I get plastic surgery for it? Or is that a cool, quote unquote, cool scar? Let me know what you guys think. Uh-huh.
now I'll say on that. Not a scholar.
Yeah.
Look around on that, but I think there's an interesting story there for sure. I do think that there's no doubt in my mind that there was some sort of tacit agreement or straight up, if you want to say like conspiracy.
And just to be clear, she didn't attack me or hurt me, or I mean, I guess I was hurt, but she didn't attack me or anything like that. There's a window ledge above where I sleep, and she chose my face as her landing platform. I was sound asleep, and I rolled over when she landed, and that's how that happened. She's done it to my. She's used my calves as a landing spot, my chest as a landing spot, never my belly, which is kind of funny. But she, for the first time in 3 years, chose my face, and that did not work out well for me at all.
To devalue Mary Magdalene and therefore devalue any feminine influence within the church. Not to say the church should be like feminine.
Okay, I need to correct this because they've talked about this now twice and they're not giving the right information. Give me 1 second. So, if you look up the Golden Legend and you look up Gabriel Knight, I love that one. Okay, so this is the Golden Legend. Okay. Let's see if I can come over here. And basically, it's a story about the origin of the French kings, the Merovingian kings. And basically, long and short of it is they're the descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. So. And there are different pieces and everything else. So it's interesting. I like it. I want to buy the book, but it's very expensive, even for me. Even when I had money, it was too expensive for me to buy, just because I can't justify it. I'm probably never going to read it. You know what I mean? But yeah. Golden Legend. Jesus's son. So this is the book that I want to buy. There's one by Penguin Classics as well. But yeah. Anyway.
Or something. I don't think it should be masculine or feminine. I think it should be a fucking church. But to paint, because we kind of got off this, so maybe.
So what he's missing there, and I don't like that he said what he said, but what he's missing there is that the church, the typological symbol for the church is the Virgin Mary, because her womb is where Jesus resided, and that is where Jesus in the wine, in the bread and wine, in the tabernacle, is in every Catholic church. Every single Catholic church has Jesus in it, in case you didn't know, and that's not being metaphorical. We literally have Jesus there, in the presence, in the presence of bread and wine, in the tabernacle. So, if you ever wondered why Catholics make a cross when they go by a church, it's because they're making a cross because Jesus is there. Literally. Like, we're not being figurative here. We're saying Jesus is literally in the church, physically present in the bread and wine. Just to be clear, same thing with Orthodox and Coptic and everything else. So Jesus is really there, really present. And that being an archetype for Mary, who's the bridegroom of God, so the church is the bridegroom of Christ. You see in the parallels here. And we are the body of Christ, but we're also the body of the church. So we are taking the submissive, this is where it goes, we're taking the submissive feminine role to Jesus. So Jesus is the husband and we are the bride. We marry Jesus. We commune with him. And yes, there is a lot of central writing about how communion takes place. Anyway, as well as liturgy and what it is to commune daily with the Lord. So it's written as if you're talking to your lover, is how it's usually put. And you don't want to cheat on your lover. So when you go, this goes back to Jewish ideas of what idolatry is. So idolatry and idolatry, so being an adulteress or adulterer and being an idol worshiper are seen as equivalent because you're cheating on the God, you're cheating on your Lord. So what happens here is it becomes about staying loyal and trusting and faith. That's why I said faith is practice in the ancient interpretation here. So you're practicing faithfulness, you're practicing loyalty and obedience. So you have all of this going on. And in this, you see the other typologies. So the tabernacle, which again, Mary, the church, the tabernacle, the womb, now becomes the Ark of the Covenant, where the Ark of the Covenant is also represented, and it contains the Word of God. So the Ark of the Covenant now gets related to Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark is going to be related to Eve. So Eve is where all humanity comes from, where all life comes from. When Eve, through Adam, or when Adam with Eve brings death into the world, we need something new to bring life to the world. So what renews life, what brings back life is the womb of Mary. So you have this parallel with Eve, this parallel with the Ark, this parallel with the Ark of the Covenant, this parallel with the first temple, this parallel with the Virgin Mary, this parallel with the physical church, this parallel type within the actual tabernacle. And if you don't understand this, it's really hard to understand what Christians are saying when we say Jesus is the bread and the wine. And the bread and the wine is no longer bread and wine, but it's actually Jesus, even though the accidents don't change, but the substance changes. I might have said that wrong, but I think that's that's right, right? The accidents don't change, the substance change. And it's the meta substance, by the way. It's the metaphysical.
Maybe it's a good time to come back to
Typology.
to paint her as a prostitute, which is like the lowest.
So that is incorrect. So she wasn't a prostitute in the Gospels. So that's actually a
How's
mistake
that
from a
incorrect?
pope. Because
So I'm glad that he says this here because earlier in here he let it slide. I'm glad that he's fixing this on Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is not a prostitute. Very good. And Mary Magdalene sometimes represents the first apostle. So there's these weird parallels where even though a woman can't have authority in the church, it is the feminine that represents the church. And if you go back through history, going all the way back to the earliest actual church, meaning the followers of Jesus when Jesus was alive, and you go back to that point, it is mostly women who are following Jesus. The 12 apostles are the 12 apostles, but if you actually look at who's following Jesus, it's women. You look at who's active in Jesus' life, who gets him to do the first miracle. It's all women. Who does Jesus talk to? He talks to women. So there's a lot of radical stuff here with Jesus, a lot of revolutionary stuff here with Jesus. And so you got to understand this feminine aspect. So when you think of the Virgin Mary, you got to think of the church. When you think of Mary Magdalene, you're thinking about the first apostles. You're thinking about the gospel. You're thinking about all of this stuff. So while Jesus is the word, the messenger is Mary Magdalene. She's the one who tells the apostles that Jesus has risen. She's the one who convinces them. She's the first to believe. She's the first to convert. She is the apostle of apostles. Mary Magdalene is super important to the church. Without Paul, you wouldn't have Gentiles be part of the church. The majority of the world would not be Catholic, would not be Christian if it wasn't for Paul. By the way, the majority of the world that's Christian is also Catholic. Catholic is the biggest denomination in the world and the biggest religion in the world, followed only by Islam. The next thing you got to realize is that women are not only the predominant population in the world, they are the predominant followers of Christianity. So the people who are anti-abortion, the people who are pro-traditional marriage, those are women. The majority of the church is made by women, is made up of women, and women have a lot of power and a lot of sway, which again goes back to the nun thing, but we'll talk about that later, if we ever get around to it.
is there are two stories. There's one story of a prostitute who comes to Jesus, and there's another story of Mary Magdalene, and they get conflated, but they're not the same story. So there's actually a pope. His name eludes me at the moment, but there's a pope at a certain point in time who specifically in I can't remember if it was a sermon or a letter he wrote or a commentary.
It's a sermon. It's a homily.
He conflates the two. But in the Gospels themselves, Mary Magdalene is never described as a prostitute.
Okay, but, and I'll take your word for that. You know a lot more about this than I do. Either way, they also paint her as not. Her gospel's not accepted. Her gospel's not interesting.
Her gospel's not accepted because it's written way too late. It's not that she's not an important figure. People would love to have a gospel of Mary Magdalene. The reason why they invent a gospel of Mary Magdalene, a gospel of Thomas, a gospel of Peter, is because people want to know what these people thought of Jesus in greater detail. But they're all written way too late. They're written almost 1,000 years too late. Some almost 300 years too late. None of them are written in the right time frame. I know that for a few of them, Bart Ehrman has gone to bat for them. But the majority of stuff that I've read, not only from apologists, not only from Catholics, but from scholars and the scholarship that I've read, almost all of this stuff is written in the wrong time period to be considered authentic, especially over here. This stuff is Old Testament, by the way. This is New Testament, and I have a Gnostic Bible somewhere from Shambhala Press. I had it here earlier, and then I moved it. I don't know where I put it. But I have two of these. I have a Gnostic Bible, and I have this Bible. These rejected texts, when you read them, it's very easy to like you don't even need a hint. You can tell they're not original. They're not authentic. They don't feel or taste or smell like Christianity. They're not pagan, like Wes said. That's nonsense. There are pagan Gnostics, like ISIS. The cult of ISIS survives for a very, very long time. But the Jesus presented in the Gnostic Gospels is not pagan. He's not an Indian guru who is speaking about Hinduism or Taoism. He's not. Forget about the anachronisms involved and the logistics involved in somehow making that happen. It's just not the case. Jesus did not go to India in his childhood like a lot of gurus like to say. That's not true. That's not what happened. These texts, the reason why these texts are rejected are because they're written way too late to be considered authentic. And there are other problems with their theologies that let you know how weird they are because they're writing about well-developed Christologies and well-developed theologies. The Christianity in the four witnesses that we have is not developed. So you see the seeds of later dogma. When you read the Gnostic stuff, the dogma is there and is being either contradicted or it's being reinterpreted. So it lets you know that it's being written after the dogma exists, not while the dogma was being created. So you have the dogma, the theology exists, the gospel writers include it into their stuff, but it doesn't get developed. You then have what's called the ante-Nicene, which is the pre-Nicene period of the church. You then have everything that develops through the councils, including I don't want to say development of the hierarchies because they already exist, but let's call it the fortification of the hierarchy, the fluoridization of the hierarchy, if you will. A little shout out, but as that happens, the dogmas themselves develop, the theologies develop, and that's reflected here. And so you have stuff like a talking cross. You have stuff like the Doicist Christ, the Arian Christ, these false Christs, these false gospels. Trent Horn has a great book on it. You want to learn more about it, go read Trent Horn's book, False Christ. But okay, anyway, let's move forward.
Story. She's therefore not involved with the church, and they paint her as, just someone who was kind of around Jesus' life or whatever. And they made this. This is what's always kind of fucked with my head. The church puts this thing on sex, right? Mm-hmm. You have to.
Again, we just read it. It's from the beginning. Also, if you read the Didache, it's there as well. So it's not. This is not stuff that develops later, like how some Protestants like. It's from the beginning. At the beginning of the church, you already have celibacy, and you have again the seeds, the roots of these ideas, being presented in the epistles and in the Gospels and in Acts. So it's there. It's present in the Bible. To act like it's not is not only ahistorical, but it's contradictory. Contradictorian?
Wait till you're married. It's like this holy, sacred union, whatever. It's run by a bunch of dudes who don't have sex, though.
So the priests do get married and have sex with their wives. It's only after Trent, after how. So what you're not understanding is two things. You're not understanding the Desert Fathers. So around the 300s, you have a move to monasticism, and you have these priests and lay people, religious, who want to get away from the temptations of life, and they go to the desert and they take vows of celibacy. You have the Benedictine Code that will come out of this. You have different stuff like this. So this is a movement within the church, and it's not just a movement in the Catholic world. It's all of the Universal Church has this movement, and this is Orthodox and Catholic. Then you're going to have the Borgia popes, what's sometimes called the pornography, the porn. I can't even say the word. It basically means that it got really sexualized at the Vatican. The Vatican, Rome itself, became a den of prostitution, orgies, this kind of stuff. And France and some other countries as well had some real problems. Read the Marquis de Sade if you want to understand. Don't read the Marquis de Sade, but read the Marquis de Sade if you want to understand the level of corruption in the church. So Trent tries to answer this. So if you read Trent, the first half of Trent is badly worded, has the wrong goal, and says all the wrong things, and is really inflammatory and really condescending. After a battle or whatever, they have a break, they come back, it's a new pope, they finish off Trent, and then Trent starts addressing all the issues. And the first thing they start addressing is all the orgies, the passing on of property to the children of priests. And so basically, celibacy. No more getting married. No more married priests. We're going to prefer non-married priests. We're going to prefer elderly priests. We're going to prefer people who are not sexually active. And this is going to become the thing. And it's because of how sexually corrupt the church got during the Borgia era. Not just Borgia, a little bit before Borgia, a little bit after Borgia. But this period of the church was highly corrupted, and especially sexually corrupted, and also greedy. So you have what's called the Counter-Reformation that tries to solve all of this. Does it do a good job? I don't know. We survived the 1980s and the 1970s. I don't know. I don't think it did as good of a job as people think it did. But they try to address these problems. It's a very long story from there, so we're just going to continue on. So that's what's not being addressed here. So priests have always been allowed to get married. Priests are married now in the church, in the Catholic Church, mostly in the Eastern Rite Catholic Church. And in Orthodoxy, almost all of them are married. But it was a solution to a problem that had become overbearing in the Western Church during the medieval period. And it's a solution that I don't think worked, and I think should no longer be. I think the solution needs to be brought down. I still think priests should be allowed to choose celibacy if they want, but it shouldn't be preferred.
Unless it's the Catholic Church, in which they have some illicit sex with little boys. But I'm saying, like, it's run by people who then say, "Oh, we're
Again, all the major Protestant denominations have had the same problem. All of them. And some of them still currently have that problem. Since this happened in the Catholic Church, since the big exposés and everything, the Catholic Church's rates of abuse have actually gone down lower than the national average, lower than the average of what's in public schools, and lower than the average of what's going on in Protestant churches currently. That doesn't mean the problem has gone away. It means that now the problem is more present in Protestant churches and in secular academia. So the problem's still there. It's just, it's not the priests that are the ones who are the majority of the offenders. It's everyone else. So it's a huge problem that by making it sound like it's just the priest is not going to get, is not going to, you're not going to let it be addressed in the greater world. It needs to be addressed in the greater world because it's a problem in Islam. It's a problem in Protestantism. It's a problem in the Anglican Church. It's a problem in the Baptist Church. It's a problem in the evangelical churches. Look at Zacharias. Look at Ravi Zacharias against Ravi Zacharias. Look at what happened with what is it? Is it Hillsong or whatever else? Look at what's going on with all these mega churches. This is a problem altogether, not just with religion. Look at what's happening in the private schools, in the public schools with teachers, female teachers, what they're doing to boys, female teachers, by the way, and also to girls. Look at what's going on. So to say what he said is ignorant of the problem. And what the Catholic Church has done to address the problem seems, if the statistics that we have are correct, to be working. That doesn't make what happened right. It's still wrong. And that doesn't make any cover-up that tried to happen right. That's still wrong. But you got to stop saying this stuff because it's counterproductive to solving the actual problem, which is bigger than the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church's stats on that have actually lowered the abuse to lower the national average and global average.
Not going to do that. We're going to be chaste and whatever. And Jesus, I think there's some talk.
And on top of that, if the rule is don't have sex, and people are having sex, even if they're having legal, illicit sex, they're still breaking the rules, and therefore it's still immoral, not amoral. So if someone not following their own rules doesn't mean that the rules don't work. It means that the people aren't obeying the principles that they are ascribing to, and they are being hypocrites. That's a problem with the person, not a problem with the rule. The rule of not doing the thing is still good. It's always good not to murder, but there are safeties you can take to prevent murder. That being said, the person who committed the murder is the person at fault, not the victim who got murdered. And a lot of the conversation that happens here is really stupid and really ignorant and emotional based. So the members of the Catholic Church, the laity, who has no power of on dogma and stuff like that, or in the rules, not dogma, I should say, in the codexes, in the bylaws, and subsequent rules of the individual conferences. So that means like the American Conference of Bishops, the Canadian Conference of Bishops, the Australian Conference of Bishops, et cetera, which are the organizations that run the church in each nation. And then beyond that are the dioceses, and then beyond that are the parishes. Okay. So in this structure, you have these corrupt conclaves, if you will, this corrupt clusters of bad people. You're not solving the problem by mislabeling the victims as the predators. So the members of the Catholic Church are not the predators who abused the kids or abused the parishioners. It's the priest who abused the laity. The clergy abused members of the Catholic Church. It isn't the Catholic Church members who are guilty. So when people try to blame the members of the Catholic Church for the sins of the father here, for the sins of the fathers, but for the sins of the nuns and priests who were abusive to their parishioners, to their children, meaning also the adults, that is wrong. You're blaming the victim. The people who are still Catholic, who suffered through abuse, are still Catholics, and you blaming them doesn't solve the problem. The problem are the priests who did these things. The problems are the nuns who did these things. The problems are the bishops who did these things. The problems is the system that allowed them to hide it, because there are rules and rubrics and canons going back to the earliest foundation of the church, going back to Trent, going back to Vatican I, that address how to solve these problems and how to prevent these problems. And the church simply ignored those rules and broke those rules to cover up their own crimes. And that's not the church whole, that is the leadership and hierarchy of certain dioceses and parishes. I don't know what the word is. Wherever the section that the parish itself controls. So that's the problem, is the people who committed the crime, not the organization as a whole, and not the individual members who were victimized.
Talk where he talked about like I'm paraphrasing here, but like I come from the Father, so I'm married to heaven or whatever rather than flesh on earth or something like that. But like, what would be so like? It seems like the church established at some point, like early on after Jesus' death, the early Christians established that he was this celibate, godlike figure who did not commit the sin of having sex on earth and wasn't married. Why is that so important? I think it's kind of weird that again, if he's divine, maybe it's not weird, but like on the surface, it's like a 33-year-old dude back then, which is like you're fucking 50, isn't married and doesn't have
So
kids.
that right there is a lie. Also, people lived into their 70s and 80s just like they live to their 70s and 80s now. If you want to see some really good content on this, I recommend watching Metatron. He has debunked this time and time again in different eras. He's done multiple videos on it in each era. But people in the Middle Ages weren't dying off early. People in ancient times and Roman times and Hellenistic times weren't dying off early. The Romans had developed medicine. They had really good medicine. So to think that the Egyptians and that these great civilizations were somehow backwater, they had technology and science and medicine. So yeah, it's not up to our level today with computers, but people 20 years ago, 30 years ago, didn't have computers like we do today. You go 40 years ago, when people were living to the 80s, people didn't have this technology. So that is a misnomer and an assumption, an incorrect assumption on people's behalf. Are there periods during the quote-unquote dark ages where, because of plague and because of mismanagement of humanity by barons, where people died off? Yes. Was that the majority of society? No. People have always had the same lifespan, roughly. So don't believe the BS that people were dying off in their 50s or in their 30s. That never happened. Healthy people live to be 70 or 80. They always have.
That would be an oddity, if anything. Like, why is that such an important part of the Christian church? Frankly, I've always thought that's like very stupid. It's just
So, and again, this guy doesn't, I don't know if he's playing the role of an idiot or if he's actually an idiot, but he's very ill-informed here. Almost all major religions have celibacy as one of their principles or as one of their exercises in being holy. Whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Taoism, whether it's, I'm trying to think of just another major world religion right now. Whether it's Islam, whether it's Judaism, there are always sects, or if you want to call them cults, within the faith that have these stricter rules where they don't eat certain things or don't do certain things. In Islam, it's a little more difficult because the Quran is very clear that on rules that are too burdensome that God did not give you, you shouldn't follow these rules. You shouldn't put on the burdens of man. You shouldn't put on extra burdens that man put on you when you're following God. That's a much more complicated conversation about Islam that I'm not going to get into here. But for all the other major world religions, just assume there's always a higher notion of spirituality or of divineness attributed to those who choose celibacy or abstinence.
just my opinion, but like, why is that like a critical part of the teaching, and then makes like sex this thing, when in reality, by making sex this thing that's like a no, you're everything.
Again, and I don't think Wes is going to have the balls to say this, although he might. Jesus was an apocalyptic preacher, and so Catholicism or Christianity at this point being a mystery cult, one of the mysteries is that soon the world's going to end, and we're no longer going to need to have sex. So if you're married, have sex, but if you're not married, don't have sex, don't get married. Choose to be married to the church because the world's about to end anyway. That's the reasoning. The end is nigh.
Things about sex. We call her the Virgin. We call her the Virgin Mary. We talk about the celibate Jesus. The celibate, like they're making it about sex. You see, like the paradox, almost the catch-22 in their wording there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an imbalance that has taken place in terms of maybe the communication of what sex is. I mean, ultimately, sex within Christian and Jewish heritage is a sacred thing. It is a beautiful thing. It is something that God designed. I mean, arguably the first mandate that God gave humanity was be fruitful and multiply. Like this is something, but the cultural, or not cultural, the covenantal understanding of what sex is that it exists within the parameters of something that is holy. In terms of the union, the first covenant was marriage in Genesis, and sex operates within the bounds of what marriage is. Now, the whole issue of celibate priests aside, I'm not a Catholic. I don't think the celibacy in the priesthood was ever a good thing or even a biblical thing.
That's right.
As a Protestant, I believe in the priesthood of all believers. So we don't have that.
Yeah.
And we don't have that because I think that is both incorrect and problematic.
And I agree with you, but also, as you said earlier, to the credit of Protestantism in this case, you guys branched off and took away some things like that, which is great. But you still descend from the people who created that religion.
I don't think that's great.
Who that was like a part of it.
Sure. I mean,
Julian, I'm going to again invite you on my channel. I would like to talk to you about Catholicism and Christianity from a Catholic and secular point of view. I am a philosopher of types. I am not a scholar. I do not have a doctorate degree. I've been a Catholic for 11 years, since 2013. I've been a Catholic. I grew up, I was born into a Catholic community. I've lived in a culture that is Catholic. And I've read pretty much everything that's Catholic. I've read not just the apologetic stuff, which I've kind of have gotten a distaste for, but I've read through most of the church fathers. There's a lot more for me to read. Most of the church fathers is just a drop in the water. But I've read the ecumenical councils. I've read all the only thing that I'm missing from my Catholic reading is the let's call it the Lateran councils, the later day councils. Those are the ones that I'm missing. But the Lateran councils aside, I've read everything from Trent Ford, and I've read everything from the first 7 ecumenical councils. I haven't finished some of the 7 ecumenical council stuff. Like some of the stuff back here, I'm not as familiar with as the stuff in the front. I need to get more familiar with this stuff. Anyway, here we go.
In terms of the status of women, I would actually say the inverse is true, is that, you have this cultural expectation in Greco-Roman antiquity where there is no natural way in classical.
So I don't know if he's making the connection or he's just letting the connection be made by the listener or here by Julian. But there's a lot of influence, Greek and Roman influence in the Gospels. Not only are they lives, which is a type of Roman writing, or Greek writing, if you will, but a type of Roman writing, which is basically biographies, but told in a, I hate to say fictionalized, but in a mythic sense. You have entertainment sense. They're told with a thematic sense. There we go, for an intended audience, and so they're willing to move things around to get a point across. So, aside from the thematic sense, though, of these lives that we call the Gospels, we have the epistles, and we have all of this stuff. You got to understand that all of these are drawing from Greek traditions. Everything in the New Testament, outside of a few lines that are in Aramaic, is in Greek, is in Koine Greek. So to think that something that could be written in a language wouldn't be influenced by the culture of that language, to me seems foolish. So yeah, there are Greek influences, Hellenistic, at least, if not Greek, at least Hellenistic influences within Christianity, especially within the Gospels. We live in Roman Catholic times. I don't know if that's true. As a Catholic, I would love for that to be true, but I don't think that's true. I have to think about that. I like that, though, Legends. Thank you.
Classical Latin to say male virgin, because the idea of a male virgin was not a thing. From an early age, you would have been expected as particularly a Roman male, like a citizen, but not.
I don't like this. I don't like this wording. That doesn't make sense at all. I'm thinking about the nymphs, and the. I'm thinking about the cupbearers. Are there male nymphs? Because the point of the cupbearers is their virginity, is it not? And loyalty is very important in Judaism, and faithfulness to your wife is important. I know you can argue that earlier on in the early, more polemical parts of Genesis, there's polygamy, but once you start seeing monogamy show up, I mean, I'd have to look into this more, but I don't like what Wes is saying here. That doesn't mean that he's wrong. I don't like what he's saying here. So I don't know if it's my bias against what he's saying that's telling me there's a red flag there, or if there's an actual logical distinction that he's making that's incorrect.
Not exclusive to that, to have sex with whoever you want, whenever you want, at any time.
Okay.
That would be the expectation. On the inverse side, there are
No. Okay, there we go. Yeah, no, he's wrong. He's wrong. He's very, 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 very wrong. So this is his Protestant bias against, and I guess his Christian bias against paganism and heathenism. So pagan, the religion of the city, and heathen, the religion of the rustic. Again, this is a distinction that's spelled out in some theories about how the ancient world worked. I don't know if they're true. I've read these things and I agree with them, but I have a hard time finding these articles now. I used to read these articles back in the 2000s and such. I can't even find them anymore. So let's say you got the Maenads and you have these orgies coming on with the Bacchae and all this kind of stuff going on. You have these purity cults with the virgin goddesses. And if you dedicate yourself to a goddess or to a god, you can't cheat on that god. Yeah, you can worship other gods, but you can't cheat on that god. You have to have your primary patron god, and you have to follow their rules. If you're dedicated to a temple, you have to follow those rules. And not following those rules have devastating consequences. Like, you'll be put to death. Loyalty and piety are tied into each other. Being loyal to the god is the same as being loyal to your city. And being loyal to your city is demonstrated by being loyal to your family. So while I get that Julius Caesar's men are said to smell like perfume, while I get that implication, as gross and horrible and terrible as that implication is, I would say that the fact that in the lives, and in the lives of Caesar or the lives of Plutarch, or Plutarch's lives, the folly of these great men is that they cheat on their wife. And when they cheat on their wife and they're disloyal, terrible things happen to them. And they're made fun of for being whorish, for being whoremongers, for being flops, if you will, for being betters of men, betters of women. It's actually an insult. It's not used as a compliment. So if you sleep with a lot of women, you're not a great hero. You're actually kind of a loser. If you sleep with a lot of men, you're seen as soft. So these are seen as weaknesses in the ancient Roman Hellenistic world. So depending on what cult you belong to would change your ideas of sexuality. So if you belong to Venus, Aphrodite, if you belong to Psyche, if you belong to any of the love gods or sex gods, I could see sex being a great thing. But for the rest of the gods and goddesses, especially the more dutiful, more conservative gods and goddesses who are against conquest or against liberal sexuality, who are more about being pure and chaste, I would say that those gods would view those actions by man or woman as being incongruent with their faith. I'm trying to draw a parallel in my mind between Odysseus and Achilles. And I'm even thinking about Aeneas, about how they're treated and how they treat women. Odysseus submitting to Circe is seen as a grave mistake. It is a mistake for him to have slept with is it Circe? Whatever, the witch who turns everyone into pigs. It's seen as a great mistake. While he's not punished for morally doing wrong, his consequence for cheating on his wife is the loss of his men and the loss of his way. How if he had stayed loyal to his wife, he could have gotten home sooner.
25 ways to say female prostitute in Latin. Because there is this understanding that males, chastity is not a thing. However, you want
Again, I just said that he's wrong there.
to be married to a chaste woman. And the women were actually held to a higher standard, and prostitutes were looked down upon, although there is this category of...
There's courtesans who are actually highly educated women, which the goal was not sex. So,
priest prostitutes within the religious system,
priestess.
where you could go and sleep with a priestess, and that would be part of a worship ceremony.
And it wasn't, they weren't like open prostitute whores. You would go at a certain time for a certain ritual. You're not just randomly going to a temple and having sex. There are temple prostitutes, but that's a slightly different thing. And it also depends on the god or goddess that you're with. Not all the temples would have had that. And again, the temples that were against sex, that were more aesthetic, I think that's the right word, you wouldn't have that because the whole idea is not to have sex. The whole idea is to be celibate, to save up your sperm or what have you. There's actually some rituals where to prevent sexual impurity, you would get the man to get excited as possible, and then you'd cut it off so he'd never get to have that pleasure. He'd never get there. You'd cut off the member to keep him from being sexually active. So this is this is a conflation and acceptance of anti-pagan propaganda from the Christians. But you got to understand that the same propaganda was aimed at the Christians. So if we hold this propaganda as true for the pagan, then we have to hold it true for the Christian, and we don't hold it true for the Christian, so therefore we shouldn't hold this propaganda as true for the pagan.
A
ceremony.
priestess.
Yeah, yeah. Like in say the Temple of Athena, had the temple prostitutes were a common thing, but nonetheless,
Not that common.
Christianity comes along, following Judaism, which has this idea of the sacredness of sex, that sex is something that's beautiful, that's ordained by God for a specific purpose in a specific time for the normative function of both marriage and procreation, but not limited to that. Because you have the book Song of Songs or Songs of Solomon in the Bible, which is basically a giant love poem from Solomon to his lover. Like that exists within the Bible. It's a thing. Sex has and always will be a beautiful thing within Judeo-Christianity. Now that goes awry when we try to make it into something where we almost over-sexualize everything.
Yes.
And then if everything is sexual, then it's almost like nothing is sexual.
Yeah.
And I do agree with you in the sense that I think that is problematic. However, Paul then comes along and he actually says, husbands, you need to look after your wife and sacrifice yourself for your wife like Christ did for the church. And Christ died for the church. And Paul actually holds men to the same standard that women are held to within the Roman ethic.
We're gonna go up to 209, and then we're gonna stop there. 209,
You need
210.
to hold to the sacredness of this institution that is going to sit at the bedrock of humanity, in that the first creation mandate was be fruitful and multiply. And so once again, that was seen as countercultural and actually held men to the same agency that women were held to in that day, which was seen as very feminizing to the Romans. They looked at Christianity.
Part of the problem here is that he's conflating Judean culture with Hellenistic culture with Romanistic culture. And all of these are different cultures. The Romans did not like the Hellenes. The Hellenes did not like the Romans. Neither of these groups liked the Jews. The Jews don't like the Christians. So there's a lot of conflation going on here and a lot of straw manning. And it's unfair to do that to paganism. Because paganism isn't even paganism. Like each god had its own cult and had its own rules. And they don't all believe the same thing.
And they said, this is at minimum,
right.
it's stupid.
Yeah.
But what all of this does, going back to what I was saying about Cicero in chastising Christianity is the religion of women, is because women started...
Oh, you know what? I thought we were closer toward that. I think we're going to stop here. Okay, so have a good night. This was good. I'll retitle this something right now. I love you all. Remember, God loves you, so love everyone. God forgives you, so forgive everyone. Love God above all and change your ways. Change today. Change right now. Don't wait till tomorrow morning. Make the change today. You need to work out, start working out. You need to get rid of porn, delete it, end your subscription. You need to start eating healthier right now before you go to bed. Go to your kitchen and throw away all your junk food. Throw away all the bread. Throw away all the cookies. Just toss it. You need to make your life better. You need to treat your wife better or your husband better. Wake them up right now and say, hey, I'm sorry for everything I've done. I'm changing right now. You need to get out of a bad relationship. You're not married. You're treating someone terrible or someone's treating you terrible. Right now, break up with them. You can change right now. You need to go back to school. Apply for that college right now. We have 24-hour applications nowadays. Do it right now. Don't wait. Forgive and love right now. And that includes forgiving yourself and loving yourself. And remember to love God above all. Change your life now. Follow him. Have a great day. Have a good night. I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye. Bye, Thomas. Bye, Legends. Bye.